everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. It's Tuesday and the patch notes for patch 9.12 have been posted, and that means it's time for another patch note rundown. As always, I'll be going through the biggest changes in this week's patch and letting you guys know what you can be looking forward to in the coming weeks. 9.12 is interesting. On one hand, there really isn't that much going on here. Very few changes to champions, no changes at all to items or runes or anything like that, so very small patch. But at the end of the day, there are still some very large changes that we do need to talk about, specifically regarding some very strong champions in professional play, specifically Ryze, Sylas, and of course Yuumi. Now, this is also the first patch that Riot are making using their new bounce framework, so that's probably why we haven't seen any changes directed at items or runes, and just champion changes. So either way, let's go ahead and hop right into things, as we do have a bunch to talk about. First and foremost, Mordekaiser's rework is in this patch. I cannot express how excited I am to finally get to play the Mordekaiser rework. It looks great, he looks great, it's everything I always wanted. I'm going to stop talking about it now because it's going to be good, but suffice to say, look forward to new Mordekaiser in your games. I think he's going to be quite strong, so definitely be on the lookout for this guy in your games moving forward. Let's go ahead and go on to actual balance changes with Ryze, which he is getting, there's no other word for it, he's getting gutted. This champion is taking so many nerfs, and it's because, like they say, he covers his weaknesses very well when he's played optimally, and he benefits from a coordinated team very well. And Riot are trying to basically remove a lot of that sort of optimal play that covers his weaknesses and remove his ability and make him more accessible to other players who aren't quite as good or who aren't willing to spend as much time on Ryze. But suffice to say, this guy's going to feel like crap to play. First and foremost, he lost 100 base mana. That's huge. Ryze is down a couple of spell casts at level 1. And it's going to take him a lot longer to scale up and get the mana he needs in order to really go machine gun fire. So level 1, Ryze is so bad. Now, his mana regen did go up to compensate, so that's a little bit of an advantage. It does mean that Ryze will get a few more casts, but the base mana being reduced by 100 is a big deal. Overload, got a couple of changes here. The damage is actually increased early, but it's slightly decreased late. He never gets a shield now. He cannot get a shield by casting Overload anymore. And the spell bonus damage, so if you fluxed somebody and then you hit him with an Overload, that doesn't scale with Spell Flux's rank anymore. Instead, it's based on Realm Warp's rank. So that means he needs points in his ultimate before Overload will be dealing bonus damage. Now, it does do up to 100% bonus damage at level 16, which is a big deal because that is a buff compared to what it used to be, but he has to get all the way to level 16 before he can benefit from it, and beforehand it's only 70%. So that's, again, a pretty big nerf to Overload. And the bonus movement speed it grants as well is decreased early, so Ryze has a lot fewer tools to get out of a gank, especially because Rune Prison is no longer a prison when it's not empowered. So if you cast it on anybody who isn't fluxed, it is only a slow for 1.5 seconds. That's another big deal. I think we all saw this coming, right? It's kind of played around with the idea of doing it before, so it's not surprising to see. But yeah, it does suck, especially from a thematic perspective. You're not imprisoning anybody, you're just slowing them down a little bit for a little bit of time. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. The mana cost early was reduced, so Ryze will be able to at least cast that ability a little bit easier. I think it will probably be a last max because there's no reason to max it first anymore. And the mana ratio did go up as well, so it will do slightly more damage, but the fact that it's not a slow unless he casts it on a spell fluxed enemy is a really big deal, because it means that Ryze needs to hit 2 spell casts before he has the ability to get that big root and make sure that you can hold somebody in place for your gank that's coming in or something along those lines. So big deal, big nerf again to Ryze. Spellflux got some minor changes. The damage went down, but the mana cost also went down early, so he'll get more casts of this early on, which, as we've already said, is important because he lost 100 base mana. It always bounces off the primary target, so it'll make Ryze's wave clear a little bit better, but the bounces don't damage enemies, and it no longer spreads flux to nearby enemies when you kill a unit. So in general, I feel like there are a lot fewer use cases for this ability now. It's not as easy to kind of manipulate it. You do have the reliability of it always bounces, but it also doesn't feel like that's mostly relevant. I like the fact that it did the damage, that you had to cast it twice, but you got damage from it, that it would bounce if you killed a fluxed enemy. All of that was very relevant, I think, to the ability. So while it's going to be easier to use, I think that there are fewer things you can do with it now. And finally, Realm Warp is now a proper 3-rank ultimate. That does mean that Overload is down to just 5 ranks, as it was normally. Realm Warp now is the bit with a damage bonus against for Overload, so we already kind of covered that. But the biggest thing here is that it now has a minimum cast range of 1000 and a maximum cast range of 3000 at all ranks. So Ryze will always be able to teleport the big distances with Realm Warp, no matter what rank the ability's at. The cooldown has been increased at rank 1. It's 210 seconds at level 6, which is kind of a big deal, but it in general is going to feel a lot more usable. There are definitely better places where you can fire off this ability and make it work, especially early on. It really felt like Realm Warp didn't do that much at rank 1, so I am happy to actually see how this is going to work out. But in general, Ryze is just completely nerfed. He's going to be worse in every single way, which is the intention. I understand that, but it's going to feel really bad to play this guy going forward. Sylas got some small changes. He's a very top tier competitive pick, but a lot of players struggle to even play him. So Riot are trying to nerf down the aspects that make him super strong competitive play, while buffing up the use cases when someone who doesn't really know how to play Sylas is playing him. The biggest way I can highlight that is the change to Petricite Burst. It gets 2 charges, which are consumed on your subsequent basic attacks. Now, this is mostly irrelevant for professional play because pros are really good at weaving in auto attacks with each ability cast in order to really maximize their damage. But if you're not that great at the game and you forget that you have a passive, you're not auto attacking, and oh yeah, I should probably do that, this doesn't punish you. And it does mean that if you abscond, abduct, you have two Petricite Burst auto attacks afterwards because you just did 2 spell casts. So it does help improve that a little bit. The base damage did go up, but it deals 70% less damage to minions. So this is a nerf to Sylas's Wave Clear, which is one of the biggest strengths he has in pro play. And along those lines, Chain Lash is also being nerfed. The detonation AoE is down to 180 against minions, so it'll be really hard for Sylas to hit as many minions as he used to with Chain Lash. The detonation damage has also been decreased. So again, Sylas's Wave Clear is really, really nerfed on this patch. He won't be able to just kind of shove out quite as easily. The other biggest change for professional play is that Abscond no longer grants himself a shield. The cooldown was increased to 14 seconds, so again, it's going to take a long time before that ability comes back up if you whiff it. But now Abduct grants the shield, so if you hit a champion or a monster with your E, the second part of your E, that's when you get the shield. I do think that's a much healthier way of doing it because that's when you're actually roping yourself into the fight and you'll need that shield, as opposed to Abscond, which is just no commitment whatsoever, dash away from the ability. If you get hit, well, that's fine, you got a shield anyways, and then you can look for the Abduct chain in afterwards. So I do really like that change. Now, there was a minor buff here to Kingslayer. It got some base heal, and the heal scales better with AP now, so he'll be able to keep himself a little bit more healthy than he used to. But the rest of these nerfs, I think, will really, really take him down in professional play. I don't think you're going to see him very much more in the mid lane. I think he's just going to get poked down too easily now that Abscond doesn't shield him on that first cast. But I do think that Sylas will be a little bit more accessible in regular play thanks to the Petricite Burst changes. And in general, I do like where these nerfs were targeted, so I think it's justified. So, moving on to our third big champion, Yuumi. People have figured it out. Hey, Yuumi's actually pretty good now. They've learned how to play her, and in conjunction with the buffs she got on the previous patch, the hotfix buffs, I should say, turns out she's quite good. So Riot are trying to tone her down and also make her a little bit more usable and give her a couple of compensation buffs so she's not quite as bad. The biggest of these is the health increase. She's going from 432 starting health to 480, which is a big deal because she went from literally the squishiest champion in the game, bar none, to tied with the likes of Sona and Zyra. So that's really nice for Yuumi, especially because if you can get the bop and block shield, that's just gravy on top at this point. Bop and block got some small changes. It had mana restore on it. I completely forgot that was a thing, but that's getting nerfed on this patch early on, and the shield value is also going down at later levels, and the scaling is down as well, so it won't be quite as big of a shield. It still shields for 300, which is a huge deal, but it's not going to be quite as good as it used to be. You and me, enemies will gain an assist on Yuumi if they damage the enemy Yuumi is attached to. That's mostly irrelevant. The biggest thing here is the shared adaptive force. It now grants flat adaptive force that scales with, that has a percentage scaling attached to it. So it's always going to be giving some value in the early game, and it's not going to scale up quite as easily, but I actually kind of like this change as it doesn't make it dependent on having so much raw stats. You're not going to say, well, I need a Jhin because he's the only one who gets enough AD that I can benefit from it. You do share at least a small amount just by default, which I do like. And finally, the range rings for Yuumi's Q aren't going to show in spectator mode. Thank God it made watching pro matches with the Yuumi really, really annoying because that blue ring always appeared, so that's a nice little change for me in particular. Moving on to some smaller changes here. Aatrox, he heals way too much in lane. It's just too hard to poke him down because every few seconds he's stabbing a minion and getting a chunk of health back for free. So that has been nerfed. His passive now has a 24-second cooldown at level 1, and it scales down to a 12-second cooldown at level 18. Now, that's a big deal early on because he really won't be getting the heal out of it, and I don't think that the maximum level requirement is really going to matter too much. So that's just a net nerf to Aatrox, and World Ender now only grants him self-healing bonuses, not all healing bonuses. So you can't just partner him up with a Yuumi or a Soraka and keep him alive forever because he's just healing way too much for you to ever hope to kill. I think he's still going to be really good. He still does a ton of damage. He still has a ton of healing. It's just going to be a little bit easier to poke him down in lane, and it's going to be a little bit easier to kill in team fights when he does have an enchanter with him. This Ashe buff here I did want to talk about in particular. Down to a 4-second cooldown on the volley I think is a big deal. That, especially if you get a little bit of CDR, if you're building Essence Reaver, which you probably do on Ashe, you're really going to be able to spam that ability early on. So that's nice. I don't think it's game breaking, but it does make her a little bit more of a consideration, I would say. Aurelia is getting nerfed as well. Flawless Duet, is cooldown is going up to 18 seconds at the first rank, down to 12 seconds at max rank, so that is a net nerf versus her live. And the range has also been reduced. This is really to open up windows of opportunity to fight Aurelia if she misses the E. And especially because the range is reduced, it'll make it harder for her to land the sort of max distance stuns that she's used to landing. So I do quite like this nerf in particular. Lulu, these are mostly just VFX changes. They did give her some small quality of life buffs to help picks. The shield strength is up and the mana cost is down at max rank, so Lulu will be more of a consideration, I would say, in the bottom lane. But I think in general still, this isn't enough to really put her into consideration. The biggest things here are Nautilus and Zac, sort of the final things for this patch. Nautilus, the Q dredge line nerf, really hurts his early all-in. He won't be doing as much damage by landing that big ol' anchor. Now, it does scale back up to its regular damage, which is nice, but he won't be as good early on. And Zac got some small quality of life buffs now that he's had the sort of mini revert and he's not quite as good as he used to be. The base damage on his W has been increased, so especially if you're first maxing that or second maxing that, you'll get more damage. And Let's Bounce can now generate a blob every single time he hits an enemy champion with a bounce, as opposed to just the first time. So he'll still have all those blobs spawning in the middle of the team fight, really allowing him to stay healthy, which is a big deal. I didn't forget about this. There was one item change, Corrupting Potion. It's just a dominant choice. Everybody takes this if you're in a solo lane. The bonus magic damage doesn't scale with level anymore. It's just a flat 15 at all levels. I don't think this is enough to remove it from contention. I really think that the reason you pick it is the sustain and not at all for the damage that it gives. That's sort of gravy on top. So yeah, okay, that's been nerfed, so maybe you look at other options, but just the sustain amount is what's going to mean that people will continue picking this item, and I don't see any way in which you can meaningfully nerf that part without just straight removing the item from the game, because you pick it because you want sustain. So either way, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Go ahead and let me know which changes you're most excited for down in the comment section below. You guys all know I'm most excited for the Mordekaiser changes, but I know a lot of people will be foaming at the mouth for these sort of Ryze guttings, the Sylas guttings. So, you know, no more seeing these champions in solo queue. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today as well. And if you're looking for more Grab the Lantern content, you can check out my blog, which is linked down in the description. I upload articles covering the professional scene, community scene, all sorts of stuff down there. So go ahead and give it a look if you're interested. Once again, thank you all so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.